Audiobook Academy Biography presents Thomas Edison. For example, the phonograph and the first practical incandescent light bulb were invented by Thomas Edison. He has more than 1,000 patents for inventions he had made. Inventions by Thomas Edison, an American entrepreneur and inventor, have made him a household name in the United States. He came from poor beginnings to become an inventor of key technology, notably the incandescent light bulb. His contributions to the American economy throughout the Industrial Revolution are well recognized today. Childhood and education. Edison was born in Milan, Ohio, on February 11, 1847. Samuel and Nancy Edison had 7 children, and he was the eldest. An exiled political activist and an excellent schoolteacher were both key influences in Edison's early life. A childhood of scarlet fever and ear infections left Edison deaf in both ears as a child, and he was practically completely deaf by the time he was an adult. A train accident that harmed Edison's ears was the basis for the story he told later about how he lost his hearing. While some believe that this is the only factor contributing to his hearing loss, others disagree. When Edison's family relocated to Port Huron in 1854, he attended public school for a total of 12 weeks. He was labeled difficult by his instructor because he was overly energetic and easily distracted. His mother took him out of school immediately and began teaching him at home. While still only 11, he demonstrated an insatiable thirst for information, devouring books on a variety of topics. Edison created a method of self-education and learning that would assist him throughout his life in this wide-open curriculum. The young Edison persuaded his parents to let him sell newspapers to train passengers when he was 12. Edison began publishing the Grand Trunk Herald after gaining access to the daily news bulletins teletyped to the station headquarters. It was a big hit with the passengers because of the current articles. Seeing a gap in the market and taking advantage of it was the first of many business endeavors for him. In addition to conducting chemical experiments in a railway baggage compartment, Edison made use of his railroad connections to travel around the country. A chemical fire broke out during one of his tests, igniting the automobile. This may have contributed to Edison's hearing loss as a result of the conductor's swift intervention. In order to get back on the train, he had to hawk his papers at numerous stations along the way. As telegrapher. In the course of his employment with the railroad, Edison was fortunate enough to witness a near-tragic event that turned out to be beneficial to him. As a thank you from the appreciative father of a 3-year-old Edison saved from a runover by an off-track train, he was able to work as a telegraph operator by the time he was 15 years old. Edison worked as an itinerant telegrapher for the following 5 years, filling in for those who had served in the American Civil War. On the weekends, he read widely, studied and experimented with the development of the telegraph system, and gained a basic understanding of electrical science. Edison traveled to Louisville, Kentucky in 1866, when he was 19 years old, to work for the Associated Press. He was able to spend much of his time reading and experimenting because he worked the night shift. Through objective investigation and experimentation, he established an unfettered way of thinking and inquiry. Because early Morse code was inscribed on a piece of paper, Edison's partial deafness was not a hindrance in his telegraph work. It became possible for telegraphers to read messages just by listening to the clicks in receivers as technology progressed. As a result, Edison became more and more disadvantaged, with fewer and fewer employment options. When Edison returned to his family in 1868, he discovered that his mother had become mentally sick and that his father had lost his job. Almost no money remained in the family's bank account. It dawned on Edison that he had to take charge of his own destiny. He took a job with the Western Union Company in Boston after a friend recommended it. Edison savored the fact that Boston was then the nation's cultural and scientific epicenter. A voting recorder he created and patented in his leisure time was used to speedily tally votes in the state legislature. Massachusetts legislators, on the other hand, were uninterested. Vote tallying was a problem for most legislators, they said. They hoped to persuade other politicians to rethink their thoughts. Children. When Thomas Edison married Mary Stillwell in 1871, the 16-year-old employee of one of his firms, she was just 16 years old. In their 13 years together, the couple had 3 children, Marion, Thomas, and William, who went on to become inventors. Mary died in 1884, at the age of 29, from what was believed to be a brain tumor. Edison married Mina Miller, his 19-year-old bride, 2 years later. Inventive works of Thomas Alva Edison. The Universal Stock Printer, an enhanced stock ticker that coordinated the transactions of several stock tickers, was Edison's first invention when he went to New York City in 1869, when he was 22 years old. Incredibly, the Gold and Stock Telegraph Company paid him $40,000 for the rights to his work. As a result of his achievement, He left his job as a telegrapher and began focusing solely on invention. Edison had gained a reputation as a top innovator by the 1870s. In Newark, New Jersey, he hired 6 machinists and opened his first tiny laboratory and manufacturing plant in 1870. Edison forged various alliances and developed products for the highest bidder as an independent entrepreneur. Sometimes it was Western Union, but more often than not it was one of Western Union's competitors. 4-way telegraphs. The quadruplex telegraph was invented by Thomas Edison for Western Union, but railroad mogul Jay Gould grabbed the technology from Western Union, paying Edison more than $100,000 in cash, bonds, and stock, and resulting in years of legal battle. As his business grew, Edison relocated to Menlo Park, New Jersey, where he established an independent industrial research center with machine shops and labs. Edison transferred his activities there in 1876. In the same year, Western Union encouraged him to design a communication device that could compete with Alexander Graham Bell's phone. No, he did never do it. Phonograph. Edison invented the phonograph in December of 1877 as a way to record sound. Tin-coated cylinders with 2 needles, one for recording sound and the other for playing it back, were at the heart of his groundbreaking invention. Mary had a small lamb, he said into the phonograph's mouthpiece for the first time. In spite of the fact that the phonograph wasn't commercially feasible for another decade or so, its employment by the U.S. Army during World War I made him a household name around the world. Lightbulb. Despite the fact that he did not create the first light bulb, Thomas Alva Edison developed the technology that made it widely available. Edison was inspired by Humphrey Davy's discovery of the first early electric arc lamp in the early 1800s to develop a commercially viable, efficient incandescent light bulb. Scientists such as Warren de la Rue, Joseph Wilson Swan, Henry Woodward, and Matthew Evans had toiled for decades to create electric light bulbs or tubes utilizing a vacuum but were unsuccessful. Edison was given a patent for his improved light bulb in 1879 after purchasing Woodward and Evans' patent and making changes to his design. For the first time, he started making and selling it for widespread usage. In January of that year, Edison set out to build a firm that would supply the world's cities with electricity. Later, Edison established General Electric from this company, which became Edison Illuminating Company in the same year. The year was 1881, and he departed Menlo Park to set up shop in towns where electrical infrastructure was being built. Customers in Lower Manhattan received 110 volts of electricity from Pearl Street's producing plant in 1882. Later business and inventions. Edison erected an industrial research facility in West Orange, New Jersey, in 1887, which functioned as the Edison lighting firm's primary research laboratory. Lighting and power systems were 2 of the areas where he invested the most time. Besides the phonograph, he also made significant contributions to the motion picture camera and the alkaline battery. Edison's function shifted from inventor to manufacturer and business manager during the following decades. There were just too many moving parts in the West Orange laboratory for one person to keep track of, and Edison discovered that he was less effective in his new capacity than he had been before. Mathematicians and scientists from universities were also instrumental in the further development and refinement of Edison's ideas. Working in small groups with only a few assistants allowed him to be most productive, and he frequently spoke out against university and corporate management. A magnetic iron ore processing plant Edison developed in northern New Jersey in the 1890s was a financial disaster. In the end, the technique was salvaged and used as the basis for a more efficient method of making cement. Theatrical film. Edison held the world's first motion picture screening at Coster and Bial's Music Hall in New York City on April 23, 1896, making him the first individual to project a motion picture. When he and W.K.L. Dixon constructed a kinetoscope, a peephole viewing device, his interest in motion pictures was sparked. Edison's West Orange laboratory soon began producing Edison films. The Great Train Robbery, which was released in 1903, was one of the first. As the demand for electric vehicles grew, Edison set out to create a battery that could power them. In 1912, Edison created a battery for the self-starter on the Model T for his friend and admirer Henry Ford, despite the eventual success of the gasoline-powered engine. For many years, the auto industry relied heavily on this method. When the United States entered World War I, the government tapped Thomas Alva Edison to lead the Naval Consulting Board, which reviewed military-related discoveries. Submarine detectors and gun location systems were among the projects Edison worked on. His moral opposition to violence, on the other hand, led him to limit his research to defensive weapons, stating, "I am proud of the fact that I never designed weapons to kill." Aged 80 by the end of World War I, Edison was still working on new inventions. A portion of his time was spent in Fort Myers, Florida with Henry Ford and his second wife, Mina, where he maintained his friendship and continued to work on various projects, such as the development of electric trains and the discovery of a domestic source for natural rubber. Patents. Edison earned 1,093 U.S. patents throughout his lifetime and filed an additional 500 to 600 that were unsuccessful or abandoned. October 13, 1868, was the date he filed his first patent application for his electrographic vote recorder at the age of 21. His final patent was for an electroplating equipment that could retain things while they were being electroplated. Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison. Edison had a long-time feud with Nikola Tesla, an engineering genius with academic credentials who had worked for Edison's company for a time. After Edison and Tesla split in 1885, they engaged in a public feud over the relative merits of Tesla's alternating currents and Edison's direct currents in the so-called War of the Currents. George Westinghouse, a rival of Edison's, then formed a collaboration with Tesla, resulting in a huge economic dispute over electrical power. Killing of elephants. As a way to demonstrate the risks of alternating current, Edison staged public demonstrations in which animals were electrocuted in public view. The 1903 electrocution of a circus elephant named Topsy on New York's Coney Island was one of the most notorious of these displays. Death. Edison died on October 18, 1931, at his home in West Orange, New Jersey, from complications of diabetes. He had reached the ripe old age of 84. In remembrance of his life and death, many people and organizations throughout the world turned off the lights or turned off the power for a short time. Legacy. As a result, Edison became a folk hero in the United States because of his rags-to-riches story. He could be a dictator to employees and a merciless rival if he were an unrestrained egoist. Despite his desire for fame, he was a social misfit who disregarded his family in favor of his career. He was also one of the most well-known and revered American inventors of all time. As a pioneer of the first American technological revolution, he laid the foundation for today's electrically powered society. Thank you for listening in Audiobook Academy. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button for more content like this. See you in next video.